The Shelby Cobra is one of the most recognizable cars in the world, even to this day. Its smooth, wide hips, coupled with that 427 cubic inch V8, make for a savage combination that people hold in high regard. But what if I told you the Cobra had a direct Chevy-powered competitor that wasn't a Chevrolet Corvette? That car, ladies and gentlemen, was the Bill Thomas Cheetah, the ultimate, no compromise, no frills, home-built American performance machine, designed to put the Shelby Cobra in its place. However, things didn't quite turn out the way they were planned for the Cheetah, leaving it with a complex and fragmented history. If you're interested in learning more about the Cheetah and its exceptionally interesting yet convoluted past, stay tuned until the end of this video to learn everything there is to know about the Bill Thomas Cheetah. Welcome to Rare Cars Revival, the channel where we break down the world's most fascinating performance vehicles and what makes them unique. If you want to learn more about cars like the Bill Thomas Cheetah, the Aston Martin Vantage V600 Le Mans, or even the Hemi Super Stock Dart, hit that subscribe button because we've got plenty more videos coming your way. Now, with that said, let's dive deep into the absolutely insane history of the Bill Thomas Cheetah. To truly understand the Cheetah, you first need to know about Bill Thomas himself and his experience before creating this iconic machine. Bill Thomas made his name tuning Corvettes into race-ready performers in the late 1950s while working at CS Mead Motors. By 1960, Bill had moved on from CS Motors and founded his own company, Bill Thomas Race Cars, which would eventually go on to produce the Cheetah. However, before the Cheetah, Thomas worked on contracts with General Motors, helping optimize a few of their vehicles for motorsports, including the Corvair, Chevy 2, and the 409 powered Bel Airs and other GM cars of the early 60s. After years of faithful service to GM, by 1963, Bill managed to convince GM executives to supply parts for a prototype that would eventually become the Cheetah. The prototype was built primarily by Bill Thomas and his lead fabricator, Don Edmonds. However, unlike the blank check backing Carroll Shelby received to develop and engineer the GT40, the Cheetah team didn't receive much funding from GM. In fact, the project was mainly financed by two men who owned a Chevy dealership in California, making the Cheetah's development all the more remarkable. Now, for the drivetrain, the Cheetah was an amalgamation of GM parts. There are two different versions of the Cheetah, the race version and the homologation version. The homologation Cheetahs used a 327 cubic inch V8 from the C2 Corvette, making around 365 horsepower. This 327 was one of the first American V8s to put out more horsepower than cubic inches of displacement. From personal experience, I can attest to how fast these 327s can be in the right car. The homologation Cheetahs also used the Corvette's 4-speed manual transmission and its independent rear suspension. The rest of the Cheetah was a mix of parts from various sources. It used GM passenger car spindles along with GM NASCAR brakes, and a unique combination of parts to make it work. Overall, the Cheetah weighed about 1,500 pounds, just a bit heavier than an original Mini Cooper, which weighed between 1,350 to 1,400 pounds. Yet, even the street-legal version of the Cheetah packed 365 horsepower from a V8 engine. It's mind-boggling to even try to comprehend the power-to-weight ratio of the Cheetah. If you thought 1,500 pounds with 365 horsepower was wild, wait until you hear about the race version of the Cheetah. The cars used for competitive racing featured a 377 cubic inch small block V8 with all the bells and whistles. This motor reportedly made around 550 horsepower, some say even 600 horsepower. In a car weighing around 1,500 pounds, that's an absolutely insane power-to-weight ratio, better than that of a Bugatti Veyron. But that's not even the most fascinating thing about the Cheetah. The most interesting part is arguably how the car was developed and designed. The car was literally sketched out with chalk on a concrete floor for its initial draft. They laid out all the major components on the ground for reference and used chalk to trace where everything needed to fit together to make a functioning vehicle. After sketching the body and making a few small revisions, the design was finalized. Just think about how much corporate red tape, complex modeling, and wind tunnel testing goes into building a car today. The Cheetah was essentially eyeballed with rough measurements, chalk, and probably a few six-packs of beer. However, the initial chassis was designed mainly as a proof of concept and wasn't intended for racing. which led to some structural rigidity issues once the car began competing. The first Cheetah prototype had an aluminum body built off a wooden mock-up, but all production models used fiberglass bodies, which were cheaper and quicker to produce. The Cheetah had its fair share of quirks and features, as another famous YouTuber might say. The chassis was a tube frame design, which wasn't uncommon for race cars of the time. What was uncommon was the placement of the engine. While the Chevy small block V8 was mounted in the front, as you'd expect from an American car, the Cheetah utilized a front mid-engine layout. This meant the engine sat behind the front wheels, closer to the middle of the car. The engine was mounted so far back that the car didn't have a drive shaft. Let me emphasize that again. The Cheetah didn't have a drive shaft because the engine and transmission were positioned so close to the rear differential that a simple U-joint connected the transmission directly to the rear diff. Almost every front-engine, rear-wheel drive car I've seen uses some sort of torque tube or drive shaft, even with a transaxle. But the Cheetah? Just a U-joint. Even crazier, the engine was positioned so far back that it nestled up toward where the driver's feet would be, meaning the exhaust headers had to be routed over the driver's and passengers' footwells. This made the interior incredibly hot during hard drives, leading to some serious performance issues, but not the kind you'd expect. The heat generated by the headers made the cockpit unbearably hot during long drives, to the point where it was difficult to stay in the car. Another heat-related issue the Cheetah faced was poor ventilation, which prevented hot air from escaping the engine compartment. The Cheetah had another significant issue: heat management. There simply weren't enough air vents or scoops in the hood or front fenders to extract the hot air and make room for cooler air to flow in. As a result, hot air stayed trapped in the engine bay, hindering performance, as fresh, cool air couldn't get in to feed the engine. Since the Cheetah wasn't initially designed for racing, it also had suspension issues that caused the chassis to flex under hard turns, leading to alignment problems and making the car difficult to handle underload. Many owners had to make major suspension and chassis modifications to correct this, similar to what the Tommaso Pantera owners faced years later. A fascinating comparison. The Cheetah's racing history is pretty slim in terms of major wins. Many of the initial cars crashed during their first test races due to the sketchy handling characteristics, making them a real challenge to drive. One of the most famous Cheetahs belonged to Ralph Salyer. His Cheetah, known for being the most successful, won 11 minor races. Salyer even converted his Cheetah into a roadster to combat the excessive cabin heat. While this likely didn't help the structural rigidity of the car, at least he wasn't close to passing out from the heat anymore. Though a few Cheetahs found some minor success in racing during the 1960s, nothing too significant came of it. Estimates suggest around 23 to 24 Cheetahs were built during its initial production run. The final nail in the coffin for the Cheetah came in 1964 when new racing rules for homologation required production runs of 1,000 cars instead of the previous requirement of 100. GM no longer wanted to back the project, and even if they had, building and selling 1,000 Cheetahs would have been an enormous logistical challenge. To make matters worse, a fire in 1965 destroyed the Cheetah factory, making it even harder for the project to continue. Ultimately, the Cheetah project was scrapped. Since then, there have been recreations and continuation models made by various companies, but they've come with a history of lawsuits and other complications. Needless to say, the Shelby Cobra's primary competitor never achieved the fame or attention that the Cobra did. If things had gone as Bill Thomas had planned, American racing history might have had another car as legendary as the Shelby Cobra. And that's the story of the Bill Thomas Cheetah. If you enjoyed this video, we'd appreciate it if you drop a like and share it with other car enthusiasts. Don't forget to subscribe to Rare Cars Revival for more documentary-style videos on the world's most interesting vehicles. Until next time, enthusiasts.